All right, welcome into this Thanksgiving week edition of Carp's Corner. We've got huge games coming up. It is rivalry week here in college football. It's the turning point in the NFL season. We've got the Turkey Day games. They're going to be coming at you. Favorite week. Said this, it's my favorite week of the calendar because you have all the sports that you need. You have all the food that you need. It's like a 3 to 4 day bonanza. And you usually have some great games of meaning and consequence. And the NFL usually gets some of that on Thursday. Probably not getting much with the Bears Lions this year. We'll see as the day goes on whether there'll be some level of intrigue in some of those games. And just usually they're not as great as you would have hoped. But then there's also coming into the weekend, rivalry weekend, you've got the Iron Bowl, the Egg Bowl, Bedlam. You got Georgia Tech and Georgia, Notre Dame, Stanford, Ohio State, Michigan, the game. I mean, all this stuff, all of these great games are here for your consumption. I love it. I'm excited for it. We're going to dive on into that and start breaking all of that down. Before we get into it, though, some coaching news as the coaching carousel continues to spin and as this entire world turns. Looking at this, we've got James Franklin, news that's fairly hot off the press, signs an extension with Penn State. Now, we've talked about James Franklin. Where else could he go? What other jobs could he potentially be interested in? Linked him to USC. Thought that was a possibility. Now, with maybe some struggles and them kind of limping to the end of the season, and they've had some injuries and different things, but he has a great recruiting class lined up. So how are the Penn State brass going to deal with that? He hired Jimmy Sexton this offseason. When you're bringing in Jimmy Sexton, it's like bringing in the wolf off of Pulp Fiction. He's getting things done for you. And so it was thought that people believed that James Franklin maybe wanted to leave. And there was maybe some people at Penn State that wouldn't have been all that upset if he would have left as well. And so you thought that this was maybe a Jim Harbaugh situation last year where they might just kind of amicably part ways and James might go take another job and Penn State might move on to their next coach. Well, none of that transpired. And I don't know if that's because USC, who's been without a coach now for a number of weeks, probably said, hey, we're interested, but we're not really interested. Maybe you're not the front runner. Maybe Penn State stepped up and said, hey, you're our guy, James. We want you here. We love this recruiting class you brought in. You've been close this year. And, if it wasn't for maybe some Sean Clifford injuries and, some other things that would happen, maybe you would have pushed it over the top. But we like what you're doing. And frankly, in college football now, if you have a coach that you like, a guy that you think is pretty good, it's usually better to keep them than the alternative and keep them. They do. The Penn State Nittany Lions ink a 10-year extension to James Franklin, $7.5 million a year. There's all kinds of incentives, winning the East, winning the Big Ten championship, winning a national championship can get him over $8 million. And for a guy who has won one Big Ten championship, never made the college football playoff, but has really put Penn State back to where they were prior to Joe Paterno being fired, I think it's a good move for Penn State. I don't know if you're going to be able to get somebody outside of possibly bringing in Luke Fickell, maybe a Matt Campbell, should he want to take that job. Those guys could potentially be better, but do they want the job? Would you have had to pay more for them? Would you have been able to get them given all the other jobs that are open? You don't know. And so Penn State does the safe thing, what many people would believe to be is the prudent thing. And they re-sign their coach and they're moving on with James Franklin at the helm. $12 million buyout. So not a crazy buyout either, should they decide to part ways. So nothing wild about that. I think that still gives Franklin some flexibility. They're paying him to stay there. Like I said, it's been rumored that his family maybe wasn't the happiest there in Happy Valley. He's a Harrisburg guy, so it seems kind of like a match made in heaven. But it looks like he's going to remain in the Big Ten and remain at Penn State here, at least for the foreseeable future. And you know what? If in 3 or 4 years he wins a couple Big Ten championships, makes a college football playoff, I'm sure they'll tear that contract up and move forward. So you've got Mel Tucker, 10 years, $95 million. Obviously, Michigan State really wanted to keep him. And there was probably the perception that he could have gotten that LSU job. Maybe even Florida would have wanted him. Who knows? And it's not always, how good you are. It's what's the next best alternative for you? What's the next best alternative for the school? And I guess they believe that Mel Tucker had some great viable options, and Michigan State wasn't interested in going back to the era before Mark D'Antonio. They like beating Michigan. They like being 10-4 against them in the last 14 years. So you see two of those guys in the East and the arms race that is the Big Ten East, locking up their coaches for the next 10 years. I think it's a smart move. You know, one of my good friends used to always say, one in the cars or two in the bar. You can figure that out for yourself. But I think Penn State and Michigan State both have their one in the car right now, and they appear to be driving on a pretty good path towards success. Other coaching news here. Guy who used to be the SEC, left Ole Miss not under the greatest situation and circumstances, finds his way to Liberty. Hugh Freeze getting $4 million a year out at Liberty. He was able to bring in Malik Willis from the transfer portal. They've had a lot of success. He's been winning there in Lynchburg. Feels pretty good about it. I think he likes it there. Talked to him earlier this season. Plays a ton of golf. Lower pressure, lower expectations. Liberty's still getting a conference here, get that whole thing figured out for them, as they're currently an independent playing right now. But I think joining the conference will help them elevate. And he develops quarterbacks. So if he can get Malik Willis drafted fairly high, maybe he can continue to portal shop, bringing guys in and continue to build that program. But he talked about the lack of stress. It's always what's your why for these coaches. And not every one of them is going to be the same. Some of them want to be at a big time program, maybe a specific region of the country. Maybe it's all about money, the prestige of the job. Some guys, it's about, do they like where they're at? Is their family happy? And can they achieve all of the goals they set forth at this specific university? Hugh Freeze said he really didn't feel like getting back into the SEC fray. He's made a ton of money. He's getting paid now well to stay at Liberty. And so I don't foresee him moving. And I think he enjoys the stress-free life that it lives in like a cabin, up in the mountains, says it's great. And you don't have people calling for your job each and every week. So that's obviously something that, some people don't mind it. Other people do. Looking at this as well, coaching, Dan Mullen obviously got fired. And, the comments that came out, about Drinkowitz, their head coach at Mizzou, about Dan Mullen, the quote where you reap what you sow. His father-in-law, he said, is a farmer. And, he made some comments about, Dan not being the most polite guy in the world from their previous matchups. And that ultimately coming back to you, and use some colorful language to describe it as well. And this is why I go back, I've talked before about, schools wanting to know the type of coach they're going to hire. And some of these schools throw out all these different names from all across the spectrum. And some coaches talk a lot. Some coaches are quiet. And I'm not even talking offense and defensive schemes. But if you're at a smaller program, usually you need a guy that's going to sell it and put it in the forefront, put it out there for people. Missouri, since joining the SEC, they've had some intermittent success, but no one's confusing them, especially in the East, with Georgia, Florida, Tennessee. And Tennessee hasn't had a lot of success, mostly Georgia and Florida. But you're not going to confuse them with those big, powerful brands that have historically been there. So you need a guy like Drinkowitz that's going to prod at Jeff Hafley in Boston College, saying, what are we going over to Boston College? We don't recruit out there. There's no players in the state of Massachusetts, and getting the attention. It got me to tune into the game for a little bit. See Drinkowitz thrown out here. You reap what you sow. All right. Well, it's got me talking about Missouri football. Has some national people talking about Missouri football, people who probably otherwise wouldn't speak on it. So probably mission achieved, mission accomplished if you're Mizzou trying to get that done, because that's the way that they're going to be able to get their names out there. Before we get into some of the college games, the big games of the weekend, it's sad because a lot of those rivalry games aren't as great. The spreads are kind of stretched. Got a little NFL news. I did want to drop this out, though, with Florida. Two things, Florida and USC, two jobs that people presume are really, really good. So Florida, the list of, the odds makers, the favorites coming in about who these different coaches could be. Bob Stoops, I believe, has the best odds as you look around right now, trying to see that at most places. Lane Kiffin's coming in second, Billy Napier, Bill O'Brien, who's now the OC at Alabama, and then Matt Campbell, head coach at Iowa. They have Bob Stoops up there. And here's the thing, not knowing Bob Stoops personally, but he's a Youngstown, Ohio guy. He retired from a Cadillac program. He retired from Oklahoma, handed it off to his assistant, Lincoln Riley. He's working in the media now. He's dabbled in it, coached in, I believe, the XFL. He doesn't want to deal with a big time program where people are going to be calling for his jobs. His dad passed away when he was in his 50s. I think if you look at Bob Stoops, he enjoys life. He's made plenty of money. Why would he want to go to Florida to deal with all of that? Now, I understand these coaches have these crazy competitive drives and streaks, and we watched Urban just leave the Fox desk to go and coach the Jaguars, but that was a new challenge in the NFL. I don't think Bob Stoops has any desire to go coach at Florida and have his job called for. You talked about since Urban left, there have been 3 coaches that have spun through there, and they've all had a good season or 2. And then all of a sudden they get chewed up and spit out. They get churned through. Bob's brother, Mark, coaches at Kentucky. I guarantee you Bob's enjoying Thanksgiving a lot more than his brother right now, who's working and trying to figure out how to have success. And so I think Mark Stoops would be more of a viable candidate than Bob Stoops as far as his desire to take that job. You can put people's names on things, but that doesn't mean that they actually want it. Florida, a lot of access to athletes in state. There's a lot of benefits to being there, but I don't think you're going to be able to pull a guy like Bob Stoops out of retirement with everything that comes with that job. And believe me, it's not a bad thing. Some people love it. They love the expectations. I don't think a guy in Bob Stoops who is in his 50s, probably getting close to 60 at some point here, really wants to tackle this at this point in his life. He retired. He had that at Oklahoma. Oklahoma, they're joining the SEC now, but he had that job. I don't think that's something that he wants. And then the other job that's, pretty big time. It's something that I kind of just, stumbled into talking with a friend of mine, Jeff Schwartz, who's from LA and played at Oregon. Now he, after his NFL time's done, resides on the East Coast, but he's still pretty tied in with what goes on out there. Everybody talks about this USC job is great. And I've kind of pressed pause on that a little bit. No one really goes to the games. You don't have the support in LA. You've got the Rams, you've got the Chargers out there now, the Lakers. You're never going to be top of the fold. This isn't 20 years ago, Pete Carroll, USC, Snoop Dogg, Will Ferrell, like those things are gone. And Jeff pointed out something really, really interesting to me. The USC said since 98, they've had 8 different coaches. Only one of them has really had success, and that's Pete Carroll. They've been spinning through guys, trying to get this right, and it's really just been Pete Carroll who's been the one who's been able to get it done. Like I said, they've had intermittent points of success, but they haven't been able to sustain anything. It's a big problem, especially when no one cares. And I don't know if the players really are interested in saying, everyone, and Jeff made this point to me, they talk about how there's all these great recruits in the state of California. Yeah, there are, because how many of them go to USC anymore? A lot of them go out east. They're going to the Big 12. They're going to the SEC, ACC, Big 10, especially the quarterbacks. And so maybe you can keep them at home. Maybe you can't, but no one's really been able to do it thus far. So when we talk about that USC job, there are some benefits to it. It's one of the most storied programs, but do recruits really care about stuff that happened 15 and 20 years ago? They care about, can you get me in the NFL and how good have you been lately? Are we playing, in big time games? Maybe NIL money. LA can provide that. It's a big market, but it is a big market where there's passion and they actually care about you. Talked about that, ratings, fandom, it's population base plus passion, probably multiplied by passion to really get that number that you're looking for. And I don't know if they have that passion there in LA. Before we get to the game, some quick NFL news. Jason Garrett fired, offensive coordinator in New York. He was in New York prior. The Maras loved him. Tissues. They're not doing anything, that's going to be make a rash decision. I don't think Joe Judge wanted to do this, but you look at their offense. I believe they're 25th in the NFL in total offense. Daniel Jones doesn't look like he's developed at all. And you just shake your head. So is all this Jason Garrett's fault? In full disclosure, he was my offensive coordinator in Dallas, and I have a great deal of respect for Jason. I think he's a good football coach. The creativity didn't seem to be there with their offense, but what also didn't seem to be there was consistency of roster. They had Saquon Barkley injured. They got Tomey. They drafted him. I really like what he's able to do in the slot. I would get him the ball more, and I think that's probably what people wanted to see with Jason Garrett in that offense. I know Giants fans loathe him, and they loathe Joe Judge right now, and I get that. But their roster that's been constructed by Dave Gettleman, he's also the one that put that together. He's the one that drafted Daniel Jones, who, hey, he was the smartest guy in the room. And Jones has been up and down. The problem is those inconsistencies a couple years into his NFL career are still there like they were his rookie season. You haven't been able to coach him out. So either the coaching's not good enough or maybe they're not able to be removed. And this is just kind of who he is. And so you saw the good and the bad of him this week on Monday Night Football. And that's the thing that's frustrating. He can make some plays, but he's also going to make some plays that are going to severely hurt you. And that is going to be the difficult part of this situation. So he's fired. He's on his way out. And Judge said they're going to do it by committee the rest of the year. I would like to see them give Joe Judge one more year, but they need to shore up that roster. And that all goes back to the general manager, one of the proudest organizations that they've had. It's been in the NFL. Bill Parcells, has been there. Dan Reeves, has coached there. And, it's been a good job. They've done a really good job with it over the years, but, it's not been a great job as of late. And so they need to find a way over the last 6, 7, 8 years to kind of clean this thing up and bring it back with some consistency. And it starts with the general manager being able to get that done. So probably making a move there. I imagine at some point it might be Gettleman and Judge together if they don't get this thing corrected. So that's one coach that's been fired. Chicago Bears underachieved as well this year. And I'd say slightly. I don't think anybody was expecting them to be like a legit playoff team, but they could be close, sniffing a wild card, but maybe a little above 500, 9-8, I think, or maybe even 8-9. I don't think it'd be the end of the world as long as they felt like there was development with Justin Fields, their rookie quarterback. But they've struggled back and forth. Fields has been hurt. They've had a lot of injuries. Allen Robinson hasn't really played that well. Their offense under Matt Nagy has lacked some creativity. Offensive line isn't great. Defense has kind of been up and down. They've had some injuries there. Some of their best players now are out for the season. Khalil Mack's done for the year. Like, those things hurt and they impact you, and I get it. It's been reported that Matt Nagy's going to be fired, after the Thanksgiving game at some point. They're playing the Lions, win or lose here. I don't think it should impact. They should be able to beat Detroit, but we'll see what happens without Fields. Andy Dalton's coming in. He's a veteran player. Detroit hasn't been great all year, but they've been close in some games. But outside of that, Matt Nagy's going to watch his son play football. And I understand you can yell whatever you want at the coaches during games. But when players and coaches are out with their families, we've reached a point in society that's crazy. And this is a lot of mostly high school kids, but the respect level is completely gone. Guy is a normal human as well. He's a football coach. Some of these guys are players, but when they're out with their families, their fathers and their husbands, and unless they're out there instigating something, if you want to ask for autographs, pictures, those things are one thing, but don't be chanting "Fire Nagy" in his son's high school football game. It's completely of poor taste. And it's something that a guy shouldn't have to deal with when he's watching his kids. And believe me, I'm all for it. These guys get paid a lot. They get paid a lot. All the pressure and heat that comes with it. And he's in a passionate city in Chicago and he's underperformed. I get it. But the civility that we've lost, it's Thanksgiving weekend, man. Can we just take a little bit of time, press pause, take a time out in life? Maybe we don't have to sit here and just bash on a coach when he's at his son's game. And the Fire Nagy chance, I know they're high school kids, so I'm going to give them a little bit of a pass. But have some level of discourse here when we're dealing with this. The guy is a human. His kids don't need to hear that. They hear it enough all the time. They don't need it chanted when the dad is at their game. My goodness. That's tough. Principal, the administrators apologize. Like I said, it's mostly the kids, but let's get that stuff together. He may be fired, and that's okay. I'm not saying he should or shouldn't be. I'm saying that when you're at the guys at his kid's game, let's just take a time out, press pause for like an hour and change. Let him not be a football coach. All right. On to these big college football games this weekend. I mentioned Egg Bowl, Bedlam, Iron Bowl, all this stuff. Georgia Tech, games that used to be great. Notre Dame, Stanford. One of the great games that we have in all of sport, in my opinion, the greatest rivalry in all of sport. Ohio State, Michigan, the number 2 Buckeyes, number 5 ranked Michigan Wolverines. Since Jim Harbaugh's been there, they've never beaten Ohio State, never been to a Big Ten championship game. Heck, not even sniffed the college football playoffs. They've been close to beating Ohio State, but still haven't been able to get it done. All of those things are available for both teams should they win. The winner takes the East, be able to go play most likely Wisconsin in the Big Ten championship game. Ohio State opened up 6.5 point favorites, been pushed up to 8.5, 9. You see it kind of moving around to 8. It will slide around probably a little more before game time. This thing comes down to one thing for me, and it's going to be the play. You want to watch football and be a smart observer of the game. Watch the lines. It's line play. Both of these teams. Ohio State's been really good. They've been able to run the football and protect C.J. Stroud. Now, Michigan has 2 really good edge rushers. They got a pair of good defensive tackles inside, but their edge rushers are pretty elite. Jabo and Hutchinson. They're NFL guys. They're both going to be double-digit sack guys. Really, really good players. They can apply pressure off the edge. They play them on the same side a lot of times, so they can run stunts in games. It'll be critical for Ohio State's offensive line to pick them up, pass them off, and to keep a clean pocket for C.J. Stroud. And then also to establish the run, which we'll get into that in a minute. But yards per rush will be critical. I'll explain why that is in a little bit later. But if you give C.J. Stroud time, you're going to see what happened against Michigan State. Maybe not to that degree, but these Ohio State receivers, none of them, by the way, Biletnikoff finalists, which is almost absurd. Really good players in there. Jameson Williams, you've got David Bell, Purdue, like good players. The fact that not one of the 3 who will most likely all be 3 first or second round draft picks in the NFL couldn't sniff it with their numbers. Absolute insanity. Doesn't even make sense to me. Then it's the glaring omission. If you needed some motivation, these guys did. Well, they got it right there being left off of it. On the other side, Ohio State's or Michigan's offensive line, can they continue to run the football at a high level? They have to. Blake Corum should be healthy. They kind of restricted him against Maryland. Son Haskins, really good players. Can they protect, Cade McNamara enough? Ohio State's D-line has been coming on here the last month and a half of the season, starting to bring a little more pressure. But Michigan at their core, they want to run the football. Jim Harbaugh wants to run it 50 times in this game. Pulling guards, pulling tight ends, tackles, just trying to mash it up in there, old school football, throw some play action passes, take some deep shots, maybe a flea flicker. You've seen that pulled out, some of those things. Ohio State's got to be able to run the ball when they need to. Michigan's got to be able to run the ball when they need to. That's whoever can do that will win this game. If you look back over like the last 20 years, the team that has led the game in yards per rushing attempt, maybe you got out rushed in a game, but can you run the football when you need to, when you have to, on third and short situations? Can you go pick up yards? The team has won the contest every time. 2 times Ohio State's lost. The rushing average has gone to Michigan. And that's all you need to know. It's been tighter at some point in times, but if you can run the football in this game, it's an old school matchup. To me, the greatest rivalry in sport. Playing in it is one of the great joys of my life. But man, it is a slugfest. It's 2 hammers pounded on each other. And so if you like old traditional football, you'll see Ohio State air it out, but it's not the quarterback that's going to make the difference. It is the offensive line, defensive line of both of these teams. And whoever can dominate the line of scrimmage will win this football game. Mark it down. I see that happening, 100% of the time. Iron Bowl lost a little bit of its luster. Bo Nix is out. Bama's favored big, 19.5. I think they win that thing running away. I wish Bo Nix was going to be able to play, maybe get a little bit of redemption for a season that wasn't quite up to the standards that he would have liked. Georgia Tech, that thing, blown out of the water, not the game that you want it to be. Georgia, 35-point favorite. Oregon State, the Civil War. Interesting out there. Because if Oregon State wins, they got a chance to go to the Pac-12 championship and represent the North. If they win, they get a Washington State loss, they get a chance to go. Washington State wins, they're in. If Oregon wins, they'll ultimately go. Chance to salvage their season. But Pac-12 out of the college football playoffs, so not a lot of people care about it. But it'll be a game that I'll watch a little bit of because I love these big rivalry games. The biggest rivalry game that'll outside of Ohio State and Michigan that could impact the CFP is Bedlam. And the reason is you've got OU sitting there at 10. You've got Oklahoma State sitting there at 7. They're favored by 4 points in this game. Oklahoma State has 2 wins in this series since 2003. It has been dominated by the Sooners. But a little bit of this with the way the Pac or the Big 12 and their round robin works. If you're not familiar, it's just the two best teams. There's no divisions. And so if Oklahoma State wins, they're going to play Baylor, who's ranked 8th. So you think if you have 2 top 10 wins, there's potential there for the committee to slide them in to number 4. You got to think Ohio State or Michigan's going to lose. Bama or Georgia's going to lose. If Bama loses, they're done. They'll be a 2-loss team. And so there could be some room, even if Cincinnati wins out, for this other team to slide in, potentially hop Notre Dame. If OU wins, they'll play Oklahoma State twice. They'll play them back to back. I think Oklahoma State ultimately wins this game. I think it's a slugfest. I don't think they cover the 4. Mike Gundy's been living with this defense. They've been doing it for him all season long. They're going to have to show up big. And this is not going to be your classic Big 12 high-flying, high-scoring game. I think it'll be a low-scoring contest, back and forth. And it matters because there's 3 teams in the Big 12. A committee that told us the Big 12 wasn't good all year. Now there's 3 teams sitting there at 7, 8, and 10. So I think one of those teams has a shot, if they look good, to potentially crack the playoff if they play well enough and get that thing done. And one of them wins convincingly in both weeks. You got, Paul Bunyan's axe. Wisconsin, they win this game against Minnesota. They've dominated this series, 3 wins since 95. They'll be the Big Ten West representative and playing most likely the winner of Ohio State or Michigan. That's who it'll be. And so they win, they're in. If they lose, Iowa's got a shot at getting in, should they be able to take care of business. College football playoff rankings came out. I think it is important to note Cincinnati, first group of 5 school to be ranked in the top 4. That's huge. Big for Luke Fickell. You've got Ohio, you've got Georgia, you've got Ohio State, you've got Bama, you've got Cincinnati, you've got Michigan sitting there, Notre Dame at 6. And then you start getting into the Big 12 teams working their way in there with Ole Miss as well. So it's an interesting little conundrum right there. Can the Big 12 hop Notre Dame? Does Notre Dame slide in? They'll be 11-1. I don't know if they'll have any wins that are as good. And Cincinnati, of all the teams in the top 10 now, of all of them, we can talk about how their schedule is weak. They have the best win of any of the teams in the top 10. They have the best win of any of the 1-loss or undefeated teams left with their win over number 6, Notre Dame. And that is 6 as the committee puts it, not as I'm putting it, not as you're putting it. That is the committee's opinion of them. So obviously a very big win. Now, probably the most important thing that we're going to talk about is Thanksgiving weekend. Everybody's got their favorite sides. They've got their favorite ways to cook their turkey. It's my favorite week because it combines sports that I love with the other thing that I love, which is eating, family time, get a couple drinks in you. Maybe you have an argument with your family about politics. Sports hopefully gives you the ability to alleviate that so it won't be an issue. Matt Judon, former Baltimore Raven, current New England Patriot, and is playing phenomenal football right now. Going to be a Pro Bowler, possibly an All-Pro. Had an interesting take. They asked him about macaroni and cheese. Not a fan, he said. It's just cheese and noodles. Doesn't belong on the Thanksgiving, the Christmas side dish list. Those are for elite sides only. I concur. I agree with them. That's my opinion too. Macaroni and cheese is fine. It's an all-American everyday food. But if you can make it out of a box in less than 10 minutes, I don't know if it qualifies for these elite side dishes that we see on Thanksgiving. People will tell me this, well, there's gourmet mac and cheese. That's fine. Even you put shells in there. You add some lobster, you bake it. Maybe you use truffle oil, all of these things. That's fine. But you're just trying to church up a turd. It's average. It's average. It's more of a 4th of July, Labor Day, Memorial Day. It's like a cookout deal. It's a summer deal, and it's perfect for that. But don't try to elevate it to this status of an elite side dish with your broccoli casseroles, your green bean casseroles, your cornbreads, your stuffing. Yeah, you got obviously the turkey, the ham is the main course that are going to be sliding there. Sweet potato souffle. Everybody has their favorite stuff. Can't be putting mac and cheese in there. I don't care if you bake it, what you put in it. I did hear this take. I said lasagna as potentially a side. Now, lasagna is a little more complex. I'm willing to let that slide here, but mac and cheese, it's a kid food. If I'm able to cook it up and eat it at 2:30 when I'm in college and I'm drunk and leave it in the pan, it's not something that belongs at the dinner table for Thanksgiving, for Christmas, when the elite sides come to play. That's all for Carp's Corner. Have a happy Thanksgiving weekend. We love it here. Believe me, if you had mac and cheese, you're not a bad person. I just don't think it belongs there on your table. Hopefully, you get to thank your loved ones. Remember, we live in one of the greatest countries in the world. Appreciate it. Be thankful for it. It's not perfect, but heck, it's a heck of a lot better than the alternative. That's all for Carp's Corner. We'll see you on the other side.